Our group chose the movie Loves of a Blonde, which was created during the Eastern European New Waves. I'm going to be starting us off with our introduction. Jessica's going to be doing the historical context, Jules will be doing the formal analysis, and then Jordan will be doing contextualization. So let's get started. Here is a quick poster of the film, and I wanted to start us off by talking about the director. So it was directed by Milos Forman, who is a very prominent director of the Czechoslovakian New Waves era. He actually died pretty recently. He died in 2018, but he had a lot of great work. He actually won an Oscar for Best Director in both 1976 and 1985. And one of his other films, which you might know, is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is another prominent film of his. Loves of a Blonde is one of his earlier films, but it is a very good start and to show us what the rest of his career is going to be like. It starts off, we follow the main character, Angela, and she is a young Czechoslovakian woman who is just trying to find love in Czechoslovakia. Though during this time, there was a large gender disparity. Essentially, there was way more women than there were men, so everyone was kind of struggling to find a significant other. Essentially, one night at a dance that her factory put on, she ends up meeting, as you see here, Milda, who is a pianist from Prague. They end up sharing a night together, and it's all fun, but then Milda goes back to Prague. Angela really liked him though. She ends up following him off to Prague, much to his surprise, and she meets his parents, but he wasn't expecting her. He was kind of expecting, just to leave her behind in Czechoslovakia. So essentially, chaos ensues. I don't want to give the rest of it away, but yeah. So some other information about this movie is that it was released in Czechoslovakia on November 12th, 1965, and then it was released in the US a year later. It was directed by Milos Forman, like I said, and this film actually ended up being nominated for the Golden Globe for Best Foreign Film, and then the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film in 1967. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that it was produced by the Barrandov Studio Production Company. But yeah, that's everything for our introduction. Next on, we have Jessica doing historical context.
Thank you, Isa, for that wonderful introduction. Now we are going to be talking about the historical context that Loves of a Blonde was released during. We all know about the Czech New Wave as we studied it in the class, but here are some basic details and other things that you should know relating to the movie. Heading into the 1960s, post Joseph Stalin's death in 1953, the country had become a completely Stalinist state. The Czechoslovak Constitution of 1960 basically solidified communism completely into law, and this constitution, though it was challenged in 1968, it remained prominent and in effect until 1989, when it was finally kind of taken out of law. The Communist Party was declared the leading force in society and in the state. The government became highly involved in film distribution. It limited creative expression. Films were often banned for what now would be considered just dumb reasons. For example, Daisies, as we know, it was banned until, I believe, the 90s because it portrayed women wasting food, which goes against every Stalinist belief. Government did not like it. So the Czech New Wave began in 1963. It was caused by filmmakers who were just tired of the restriction and they just wanted creative freedom. So they basically were like, yeah, we're gonna do it. And honestly, good for them. The films from this movement were often banned. Yes, as I just said. Okay. Here's a quote. The same socialism which bears the responsibility for stifling its artists' creative efforts in the 1950s must also be credited with shaping their artistic vision in the 1960s. From 1962 to 1968, a basic goal of Czech filmmakers was to liberate the ideals of socialism from the refined state in which those ideals had been trapped. Key New Wave films, Daisies. We all know Daisies. We all love Daisies. 1966. The Shop on Main Street, which came out in 1965. And Black Peter by Milos Forman, which came out in 1963. Ivan Passer, a key filmmaker, said that the Czech New Wave was a conspiracy against stupidity, and I thought that this was a very good quote as it was brutally honest, and I thought it was great. So, yeah, Jules, you're up, girl. Have fun.
Thank you, Jess. I am now going to be jumping into the formal analysis. There's one motif I would like to note specifically before I get into how the formal elements depict a generational conflict that's much deeper than seems on the surface. At the beginning of the film, there's a woman playing guitar and she's singing "And I Love Her So." At the end of the film, one of Andula's dormitory mates plays a very somber guitar song. This is a very strong motif that Forman includes in the film because he's showing how love does not always last, especially young love, which is kind of a sad take, but it can be very true, especially in the way that Forman depicts it, and also the motif of bands. As Milda is in a band, this is also a significant piece in the film that I thought was very interesting as it begins this way and it ends this way. So I'm going to be delving into how Milos Forman does divulge a conflict within generations, but in a very low-key way that I at first didn't notice myself. I'm going to be citing from class notes and my personal notes, and I'm going to be explaining one specific sequence that is more towards the end. In the very beginning, Andula is wearing this gold ring from her previous lover that she's no longer with. Her dormitory mate is in awe of this ring, and they're talking about him in this way that seems so permanent. But truly the point is that love is a cage that Forman is trying to convey, and it does not always last. This directly correlates to the final scene in formal elements, not only because of the guitar and the music motif I mentioned earlier, but also because of the way the sequence is laid out. After Andula leaves Milda's home, she goes back to her dormitory, and she's telling her dormitory mates all about how great his family was and how the parents are wonderful and how she's going to be back. But this is definitely not true, as you will see in the following sequence. She's pretending to be in awe of him, almost like the previous lover. The girls are also laying in bed, just like the beginning sequence, and this, of course, ends in somber guitar playing. So now I'm going to dive into the main clip so you can truly see how Milda's family truly was not good to her, as she states here.
Že ji nezná, no.
A co ještě?
Že ji nepozval, no. A už spí už, prosím tě.
No ale když jste tam mluvili tak dlouho.
No, dlouho jsme mluvili, no. To víš, musím s ním trochu promluvit, no.
A kde jsi byl?
Hrát.
A potom?
Pak jsme si šli sednout.
Sám?
Ne.
S kým?
Co?
S kým?
S klukama jsme si šli sednout.
A s kým ještě?
No s klukama.
To je hrozný tohle. To by byl pěkný pořádek. A vám by se to líbilo, Sešna. Ale ty by si se tu moc nevyspal. Pojď. A moc se mi nespírej, víš?
Pojď.
Jen pojď. Pojď k nám.
Nestrkej
To
do
bude
mě,
lepší.
Ergot, já tam budu
Jen
sám.
pojď. Tak, a mám tě na očích.
Člověče, já tady spát nemůžu, no.
Prosím tě, ty to vydržíš, ne? Ty.
Co vydržím, ty tu spím jak na hranolu.
No já za to nemůžu, kam jsem ho měla dát?
A teď jsem tam mohl klidně zůstat.
Já ti dám, viď, já tě budu ještě podporovat
Ale prosím
tom,
tebe,
aby
co
si
by
spal
se
s holkou.
The way in which this was filmed captures the essence of the characters perfectly because it's more slice of life, it's rather simple, and it has natural lighting. It doesn't truly have a too dark of a tone or too bright of a tone. I wouldn't say Forman was very experimental when it comes to terms of the shooting style. I would say it's very standard, but I would say that he's very experimental in the content because the film, in my opinion, isn't too powerful in terms of content in the middle, but the beginning and end are especially prominent, and especially of the way the sequences are formatted. He definitely tried to capture the way Angela experiences her life daily and how she lives with these girls in her dorm. I don't think he was trying to be very obvious about his message, but he definitely made it clear by the debate in the end. This film and the sequence I specifically shared definitely depicts an auteur-focused film. I find that Forman may have conveyed some personal feelings throughout this film for sure, or experiences that he may have had in love. Not these specifically, but definitely within the censorship of society at the time. Now we're moving on to Jordan with contextualization.
The Eastern European New Wave and the Czech New Wave produced so many respected and renowned directors. However, two of the more famous faces featured here are Vera Chytilova and Milos Forman, who directed Loves of a Blonde and Daisies, both in the mid-1960s, and both of which focused on romantic idealism and female independence, which was a big focus on Forman's later work. However, much of Forman's earlier work focused on political rebellion and experimental cinema. Forman was a huge voice in this area as he expressed his feelings that everything before this era was so artificial, so far-fetched, and so unreal. He believed that the government was suppressing creative freedom, and he was determined to break this path, especially with his film The Fireman's Ball, and his other films made within this genre all reflected this message, which was to show something new and show something revolutionary for its time. Loves of a Blonde and Daisies had so many similarities within its own genre. These were the two films that I noticed that were most similar, yet most different, because both of them had untraditional romantic love stories with a hint of dark comedy. However, Loves was more of a freewheeling structure, and it was definitely had the use of non-professional and professional actors, and both of these films showed that love doesn't always work out. So, some of Forman's earlier films focused on government and government issues, which is what I was relating to beforehand. However, these past films definitely had an impact on this new wave of film because it allowed for a lot more creativity and allowed for Forman to do what he actually desired and create his own work and create his own films, because so many of these had anti-communist opinions, and so many of these showed that the directors were making bolder choices and therefore influenced the creative freedom that we now know today. Finally, Loves of a Blonde was something that encapsulated the new wave of film and showed us just how much we can use film to our advantage, and showed us just how many stories we can tell. So, Loves of a Blonde was definitely a tipping point in this new wave of film because of the use of experimentation and Forman's emphasis on originality. The new wave films are some of the most respectable ones that we are lucky enough to study. Loves of a Blonde was an Oscar winner, it was an Oscar nominee, it was shown all over the world, and it had so many themes that had to deal with the larger wave of European cinema, which continued to be used. mainly because of Forman, but also because of other directors from this time, like Chichalova and Shorn. It was the rebirth of experimental cinema, and it was such a big shift from the many limitations of film to the freedom for these directors. Finally, Loves of a Blonde was something that encapsulated the new wave of film and showed us just how much we can use film to our advantage, and showed us just how many stories